Welcome to Bayside IELTS and our series of IELTS preparation videos. If you haven't already, you should go back and watch the Introduction to IELTS Academic Writing Task 1 video. There, you'll learn about the basic requirements, the different kinds of visuals, and the marking criteria. In this video, we'll be looking at one type of Academic Task 1, and I'll be guiding you through how to write a change over time description. From the intro video, you would have already learnt 3 requirements, but let's refresh. Firstly, your job is to describe a visual, one or more graphs, charts, a process, a diagram, or a map. Write at least 150 words. Time-wise, no more than 20 minutes is recommended. Those are the basics, but there are 3 other important things that you might not be aware of. These 3 things can make the difference between scoring Band 4 and Band 7 in the task achievement criterion. First of all, we're talking about key features. The examiner checks that you have presented and highlighted all the key features. In other words, have you mentioned all the important parts of the graph or process? Have you highlighted or emphasized them? Or have you just listed a bunch of details in no particular order? Next thing, you must include an overview. This is a general statement of the main trends, differences, or stages. I'll show you how to do this shortly. A final thing to mention is data. What is data? It's just numbers or percentages or whatever your graph is showing. $500, 250,000 people, 28% of students, whatever. In your Task 1, the examiner checks for these specific numbers or percentages that support the statements you're making. I want to show you how these things can affect your score. Remember the marking criteria from the first video? Here's a section from the first column, the task achievement criterion. And we're down here in Band 4. The first bullet point says, attempts to address the task but does not cover all key features. This means that missing a feature limits your score to Band 4. Let's look at just one band above this, Band 5. Look at the second bullet point. Recounts detail mechanically with no clear overview. Keep reading. There may be no data to support the description. So this is why your Bayside teachers are always on about the overview and the data. Missing them can seriously impact your score, regardless of how good your writing is. Now that we have all that in mind, let's write. You'll need a pen and paper for this part. Here's a line graph. Pause the recording and have a good look at it. Ready? Up here we have the rubric telling us the graph shows the consumption of fast food by Australian teenagers from 1975 to 2000. Over here we see the fast food represented, pizza, fish and chips, and hamburgers. Down the bottom here we see the time frame, the years, and then on the side here we see number of times eaten per year. So these numbers, 20, 40, etc., represent how many times an Aussie teenager ate these foods in a given year. It's not about kilograms or money or people, it's about how many times they ate the food. So this is a typical change over time graph. Our job is to describe what happened from 1975 to 2000. And we do this following a very simple structure. We need an introduction, an overview, and body paragraphs or key features. Let's start with the introduction. Now we have a beautiful introduction here in the rubric, but you shouldn't copy it word for word or the examiner will just ignore that section. So we need to reword the rubric, and this is very simple. You just need some standard phrases, 2 or 3, and reuse them for any task. Here are some that we like to use in class. To begin, the line graph shows or compares or gives information about. Just nice and simple. Next bit, the line graph shows, compares, gives information about the amount of fast food eaten by teens in Australia, or how much fast food teenagers in Australia ate. When? From 1975 to 2000, or between 1975 and 2000. Notice the prepositions here, from and to, between and. Minimize errors here by just learning these phrases. There's no need to be creative in this part of the exam. Just keep it simple and accurate. Pause the recording here and write your own introduction using this language. Go. Here's mine. I'm going with the line graph compares the amount of fast food eaten by teens in Australia between 1975 and 2000. It's different to the rubric and covers all the important information I need for an introduction. Next in our structure is the overview. Remember, this is a general statement of main trends, differences, or stages. So we're thinking here about the overall changes. What changes occurred in the consumption of these 3 fast foods over the 25-year period? Well, in 1975, fish and chip consumption was high. Aussie teens ate this about 100 times in that year. But by 2000, consumption had fallen to under 40 times. If we look at pizza and hamburgers together, we can see that in 1975, both foods were not very popular. But by the end of the period, hamburgers were the most eaten fast food, and consumption of both had soared. And this is what we need to include in the overview. No data or numbers. We're just mentioning that fish and chip consumption went down, pizza and hamburger popularity up. Fish and chips was the most popular dish in 1975, but by 2000 it had become the least. I want to include that in my overview as well. So let's bring up our introduction and start the overview. Remember, I said the overview is a crucial part of the scoring, and without it, you really sacrifice some points. So, present your overview clearly. In our class, we always start with the same words. Overall, it is clear that. This shows the examiner, here's my overview. Overall, it is clear that. I'll add a linker because I'm going to contrast some information. While hamburger and pizza consumption rose, I could say here fish and chip consumption fell, but I want to show a range of structures. So instead, there was a adjective noun, significant drop. I could say there was a considerable decrease. There was a substantial decline. Next, I need a preposition, in. There was a significant drop in, there was a considerable decrease in what? The popularity of fish and chips. When? I don't want to repeat the same words as the intro again. Throughout the period. And one more thing. It, meaning fish and chips, went from the most eaten food to the least. And that's the overview done. Now we need to look at the key features and the data. Let's start in 1975 and we'll report these figures. Looking at fish and chips, there's a fluctuation here, not hugely significant, but I'll include it. And this fall is significant. I'm going to put all this in one paragraph, key features 1. The figures in the first year and the change in fish and chip consumption. In my second key features paragraph, I'll deal with pizza and hamburgers and describe this rise. If you're confident, pause the recording now, follow this plan and write your own key feature paragraphs. Otherwise, follow me. In 1975, Aussie teens ate fish and chips 100 times, but only consumed pizza or hamburgers around 10 times. Notice how I'm using data here, the numbers. Back to fish and chips. Fish and chip consumption fluctuated in the late 70s and early 80s. Before plummeting in popularity after 1985, when it was only eaten about 40 times. On to my last paragraph, key features 2. Here we go. Let's start with a cohesive device, a linker, to show contrast. In contrast, include a general statement here. The trend for pizza and burgers was dramatically different. Although these foods were not very popular at the start of the period, by the mid-90s, Aussie teens were eating hamburgers about 100 times a year and pizza around 80. Following this considerable rise, consumption leveled off in both cases. And we're done. There should be time to read and check that we haven't repeated vocab or made careless errors. Have a quick look for yourself at the full sample. Pause the recording and read it carefully. We are over the word limit. We've got a clear overview. We've described all the key features and we've included data to support our statements. We haven't predicted or suggested why these changes occurred, just described. That's why this sample would score very well in the real test. And there you have it. Now it's time to practice on your own. Come back and review this video anytime and make sure to write down the useful language so that you can recycle it in your own work. Happy writing!